Welcome to the Salem News Reporters Podcast. I'm Rick Moore, along with a special guest once again from the Salem News, Dustin Luca, covering mostly Beverly. Dustin Luca covering mostly Salem, Paul Leighton covering mostly Beverly, and we welcome Caroline Enos, a former student that I know and a former colleague of my daughter when they were in high school. Welcome, Caroline.
Hi, happy to be here.
All right, great. We're going to start with a common theme, and I'll let the viewers fill in what the theme is. But we're going to start with Caroline. Caroline, you covered something that was very emotional this week at Danvers High School, and maybe you'd like to just run with that because it's been 10 years since Colleen Ritzer was so awfully murdered, and a nice event took place this week.
Yes, for sure. So as you said, it's been the 10th anniversary of Colleen Ritzer's death. And she was a math teacher in her first year at Danvers High School when she was sadly killed by one of her students. And, that's a story that's really resonated in that community in her hometown of Andover for a decade now, and has never really left. So in a lighter spin, which I'm happy to say, the school committee agreed to name the Danvers High School Library in her honor, a move that was pretty much supported by the entire school. It was brought on by a fellow math teacher who she had worked with, named Julie Glynn, who wanted to honor her, and thought that this would be the perfect way, since in her words, this is, libraries are the heart of the school. Everyone's welcome there. It's more than just books. It's a space for people to really feel like they're part of that community. So everyone was very much in favor of it. It was a unanimous vote. Her family was very happy about it, because her mother had said that they'd really wanted her to be remembered in some way at the school, and this was a really moving way. So I'm very happy that on the 10th anniversary there's something positive coming out of it, and her family's done great. They have a whole organization. They've raised money for students trying to go into education. So it's 10 years out, it's been more of a legacy of her kindness than anything else.
In your studies and stories and so on in your reporting, with respect to the legacy of Colleen Ritzer, is it still something that people remember her fondly rather than what happened, townsfolk or students, because now students go in and it's been 10 years, kids don't even know who she is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, the lasting conversation has been about who she was as a person more than anything else. I mean, everyone in town knows what happened. Her former students, I don't think we'll ever forget that. I remember I think I was a student, at the time when it happened, and I lived in Gloucester, as you know, so that was something that always stuck with us. But, coming into the town, it's very much been about, who she was. She was a very kind woman. She was very passionate about what she did, and she was a first-year teacher, early in her career. So the fact that happened was so jarring, but they definitely in the town haven't let that define her, even though that's mainly what she's known for outside of the town. So
great reporting. Thank you for that. All right, Paul, we welcome you back. You and Dustin have been covering a horror story out of Salem. Could you give me some insight on how you got news of the shooting over at Salem State and what happened that when you first learned about it?
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Rick. We woke up, Wednesday morning to the news that a Salem State student had been shot and killed overnight. This came, just a few hours after the end of, the Halloween, the Haunted Happenings celebration in Salem. Dustin can talk more about this. Not necessarily related to that, but it was this young man, 18-year-old freshman at Salem State, Carl Hens Belliard, was shot and killed at about 1:30 in the morning on Forest Street near the O'Keefe Center, that neighborhood near the O'Keefe Center, the Salem State O'Keefe Center. And then within pretty short order, the authorities had arrested another 18-year-old and charged him with the murder. So yeah, obviously sad story. The victim, Belliard was a good basketball player, was listed on the roster for the Salem State men's team, which is supposed to start their season, I think, this week. And he played basketball for Worcester North High School, which went on to win the Division I state championship. It's kind of funny, Rick, because I went to the the Beverly High boys basketball, state tournament game that they hosted last year, and they played Worcester North. I hadn't quite remembered, so I think I actually saw him play and saw that team, which was a great team play. But, Dustin picked up the story yesterday in court and has a lot more information too about that case.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, and one thing just to note, so if you look at today's paper, there's a couple of photos on the front page kind of covering this story, and one of them is a photo of him actually shaking hands with the mayor in Worcester. And the caption doesn't say it, but I think that in the photo you can see that he's actually receiving a set of keys to the city. And this was in response to them bringing the state championship home to Worcester, so we learned a lot more yesterday about who he was. And I'm sorry if I get a little teared up. It's been a very emotional story on this end, but he was in school in Salem. He was a Horace Mann kid, returned to the campus to go to Salem State University, because when he was in Horace Mann, it was, of course, at Salem State. It wasn't over on Wilson Street. So for that was kind of a bit of a homecoming for him. And I know he was really beloved and celebrated in the Salem State community. They had a vigil last night that was going on inside of the O'Keefe complex that, media was prohibited from, but they set up this like beautiful safe space that, no cameras were allowed, no videos were allowed, just to give students, members of the team, the opportunity to kind of grieve and kind of say what they need to say, feel what they need to feel, because that's really what this is all about. And of course, the suspect also had a lot of really significant ties to the community. He was at not Salem State, he was at Salem High School for freshman and sophomore year, was over at New Liberty Innovation School for junior and senior year. And it was through that he was also registered and had the ability to enroll at Salem State University, which it doesn't look like ever happened. But it was through the alternative school placement at New Liberty Innovation School that he was kind of almost on the same trajectory at Salem State University. So now the case is kind of developing in the background. When they arraigned the suspect yesterday, was on a murder charge and then also on a warrant that was tied to smashing the phone of it looks like a prior love interest of some kind. And the reason why they were able to get to the suspect is because that prior love interest was actually in the car with the victim at the time of the shooting. So one of the questions right now is, unfortunately, who was the intended target of that? Because one of the things that they read in court was that the suspect went to the scene looking for the woman, and it was, Bailliard who ended up, dying, unfortunately. So there's a lot of things that we don't know right now. All of the records are impounded so that the state can do its investigation, which is going to lead to some sort of a grand jury process as well. So we're expecting to see all the the police statements and everything probably within the next 90 days. They put a 90-day impound on it, but they're kind of thinking that the grand jury process can wrap up before then. So that's when we're going to start to know more. Until then, things are pretty much going to dry up and pretty much basically be only about serving as a memorial for Bailliard, because he was an absolute wonder kid. It sounded like a rock star. I never got a chance to meet him, and I feel like it's a real loss just seeing the way that the memorial built up on Forest Avenue last night. So,
when you read about something like this in the cold print of a newspaper, I don't get the complete emotion involved in what you people have to cover, because you're dealing not only with the police and so on, but you also, from time to time, have to interview people who knew him and sometimes family. And I think it's important that, and I read an editorial about this recently with respect to mass shootings, but I think it's important that you do what you do in terms of reporting on the effects that it has on other people, or that these things have on other people. And again, when you're reading it dispassionately, it's like, oh, geez, that's a shame, and that's it. But when you talk with people and like what you are doing now, all three of you, it lends a real sad humanity to this stuff. And it's good to know, more about the people who know the victims and so on. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And it can't be easy. I mean, I've covered a couple of fatalities in the course of doing this at MSO. And sometimes I say, I don't want to do this anymore. I just can't do this. So I applaud the fact that you do what you do with compassion. And Dustin, before we go on, we were talking just before we went live, and you were telling me about young Ms. Enos coming into the Salem News and her coverage area. And I'm so happy that we've extended this podcast. But tell me what you were just saying, because I thought that was terrific.
No, yeah. So she's an absolute rock star. And again, I apologize for doing this to you directly in front of you, but I mean, it's you kind of be around these circles in a little bit. And I actually, it's been really great actually to see the coverage of what's been going on with Colleen Richard, because I was actually in Andover at the Andover Townsman when that murder took place. And I was actually, I can remember being out there at the family's home the day it happened and everything, and just, seeing, Joe Harmasinski was covering it from Danvers at the time. But, these are really, really hard, difficult communities to cover. I also, one of my passions on the side on the weekends is I do DoorDash, because I love it. It gets me all over the place. I meet all kinds of interesting people. I have to drive into all kinds of great neighborhoods. And one of the things that I've learned in that process is just how massive Peabody is. Like, you've got South Peabody, West Peabody, it's like North Peabody. Like, there's all these different, like, they feel like their own individual cities. And Caroline not only covers that, she also covers Danvers.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all of this stuff in this massive geographical area that feels like Derry and Londonderry, New Hampshire, where it's like, 70 miles across, and then another community on top of it. So
I was just thinking maybe that's why some newspapers are short staffed, because they've got such great reporters who can do so much.
yeah, don't say that.
I know. I know. Well, that's what we're trying to get the word out there. So, Caroline, congratulations on that. I agree. And that brings me to a next broad subject that you're all involved in, and that's municipal elections. So what can you tell us about your coverage area, Caroline?
I can tell you quite a bit, but first, I just also want to give a shout out to Dustin for his really, really great coverage of Halloween in Salem. The way you make me sound like I'm a superhero by covering Peabody and Danvers, but you're a superhero for covering Halloween. So, and our other reporter, Mike McHugh, he did a great job helping you. So I just wanted to shout out that.
All right.
But as for the elections in Peabody, since obviously Danvers is a town, so they do their elections in the spring. Mayor Ted Betancourt is actually facing his first challenger since he was elected in 2011. He actually, faced off against another person in the preliminaries, but obviously was whittled down to two. Her name is Rochelle Agnetta. She is a owner of the salon CC at Mills 58 in Peabody. They are both, I think, very well-spoken candidates. It seems like a good opponent for him, especially since, again, it's the first one that he's had. While he's very much been promoting, preserving open space, he's been pushing for a new public safety building up on Allen's Lane behind the current police station, near the Higgins Middle School. Those have been, big parts of his campaign for her. She's very much pushing a new T-stop in Peabody, since Peabody somehow doesn't have the commuter rail. And with the closure of Rousselot, which is one of the biggest properties and businesses in Peabody, which actually has the city's last operating railroad, since they bring supplies to the plant. She's really hoping and campaigning on putting something there on the station there, hopefully. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. And same with the at-large race, since of the 5 incumbents, they're also facing off against a second-time candidate who doesn't have any elected experience, but she's run before. Her name is Luca Chalver. She's again, seems like a very competent candidate. And then other major races, Ward 2, Mary Beth Malia, who was the Ward 2 counselor back for a term in the late 90s. She's facing off against Pete McGinn, who's been in for 5 terms. So you have 2 people with the same experience in some ways. And then in Ward 6, we are seeing 2 first-time candidates, since the former, or rather he's still there, but he's stepping down with this election. He agreed that, or said that he wouldn't run again earlier this year, Mark O'Neill. So we're seeing Michael Higgins, who's an engineer, and Brian Cox, who's a pipe fitter, go up against each other. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how the council kind of changes with a brand new person coming on. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this will play out on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. Anecdotally, I'm guessing that Mayor Betancourt is a pretty heavy favorite.
So far, I was out talking to people on campaign election day for the preliminary election, and there were a lot of people who are very much in favor of him. But I also heard the people who are hoping for Rochelle or a change in the city, because I think every city there's always people who want to see change regardless of what's kind of happening. So again, we'll see what happens.
All right, let's go to Beverly.
Thank you, Rick. First, I just want to echo all the compliments for everybody passing back and forth. No, it's great to see young reporters, coming into the business. It's a tough business, as we know. So to have somebody like Caroline, it's really great. And in Beverly, the election is, well, we have an election for mayor. Mike Cahill has been the mayor for 10 years. He's seeking re-election. He's being challenged by Jamie Zarella, who's a first-time candidate, never run for office before. He's the owner of Big Jim's Auto Body in Beverly. Cahill beat him by about almost 1,000 votes in the preliminary election when there were 3 candidates. So we'll see what happens in this one. And then there's also, for the first time in a long time, Beverly's facing ballot questions. There were 3 questions on the ballot to make changes to the city charter. The big one is whether Beverly should go from a 2-year mayoral term to a 4-year mayoral term, like a lot of communities have. And then the other 2 one is to expand the school committee by 2 more seats. The advocates for that say that the work of the school committee is getting more involved. There's a heavier load and they could use a couple of extra people. And the third question is about whether a ward counselor or school committee member who moves to another ward within the city during their term should be able to finish out their term rather than have, this came about because John Frady's a few years ago in Ward 6, he moved across town. So he still lived in Beverly, but the city council had to pick a successor. He wasn't allowed to finish out his term. So those are the 3 ballot questions. There's a school committee race in Ward 3. That's the only school committee race. And then the other kind of quirky one in Beverly is there's only 3 candidates for the 3 city council at-large positions, the 3 incumbents, but there's actually a contest there because Beverly is the only community in the state where the top vote getter among the at-large candidates becomes council president. So voters are going to pick a council president, whether they know it or not, because it doesn't say on the ballot that that's the case. So it's kind of a quirky thing there. So that's the recap of the Beverly election.
Generally, aren't city council presidents selected by the city council? Isn't that usually?
Yes. Yeah, I did a story a few years ago, and that's when I found out that Beverly was literally the only one. All the other ones, the councilors pick a president. There are a couple of communities where the voters pick the council president, but that's actually a separate election where you go in and you vote for a council president, if that makes sense. But in this one, you don't. It's just the top vote getter among the 3. So yeah, it's kind of unusual.
Yeah. All right. We'll pay attention to that through the Salem News. Let's go to Salem with Dustin Luca.
Hi. So not a whole lot going on in Salem. We figured out our mayor stuff months ago. So Dominic Mangella was elected on May 18th. So that was kind of the first stage of elections this year. There normally would not have been a mayoral election this year, but because of Kim Driscoll becoming LG, that kind of changed things a little bit. So what we have left is a 6-way race for city council at large for 4 seats and contest in wards 1 through 4, 2 candidates each. And then school committee is a 3-seat race between 4 people. So what's interesting about those, the school committee race, because you're only going to have one person losing, it's really kind of a comparison of ideas and kind of what makeup of the school committee you want the most. So that race is super polite, which for some reason the school committee race in Salem always is polite. And then the at-large race is kind of interesting because the 2 challengers are actually younger than all 4 incumbents. So it's kind of like a, young folks versus the others. Not to say that there's anything wrong with being 40, especially because I just turned 40 last week. But so that's also a thing. Ward 1, you have a change from Bob McCarthy to whoever's going to win that race, and that's up between Cynthia Jerslow and Chris Malmstrom. Ward 2, you've got an interesting one between the incumbent Carolyn Watson-Felt and Chris Fuccione, who has worked a lot with the homeless community and has himself been homeless in the past. So he's kind of speaking and representing them. And there's a lot of homelessness in downtown Salem. So that's kind of where that's coming from. And then wards 3 through 4 are super interesting because they're both bordering Highland Avenue and are both dealing with a massive project there, dealing with the high school, dealing with Salem Woods. They're both inland wards that are dealing with climate crisis in a different way. So we're going to have a bunch of coverage kind of to wrap all that up on Monday. That's going to focus on wards 2, 3, 4, and then school committee, because we actually just ran the other stuff previously. So that's kind of what's coming up there.
All right, great stuff. We're going to go in reverse order now and ask sort of a final question, comment, or whatever you might like to talk about. But I have to ask, Dustin, your coverage of haunted happenings was amazing. Photographs, whoever was taking the photographs was incredible. And I just maybe a summary of the month, because it had to be you had to be exhausted.
It was a really challenging month. There was a lot of highlights. Hocus Pocus cast coming back to town was absolutely massive. There were some challenges. The city's continuing to tackle its parking issues, its traffic issues. The MBTA pulling trains in that first weekend wasn't great. And then we also had a very, very serious pedestrian crash on the hottest night of the year, which was the Saturday before Halloween. So there's going to be a lot of follow-up, a lot of after action. And in September, the city council was trying to start something up looking at nip bottles and proposing the idea of banning them. The person who's accused of striking a pedestrian in front of Allison's house, the Ropes Mansion there on the last Saturday of the month, had 3 empty bottles in the car with him at the time. So I'm kind of expecting that, in addition to everybody kind of responding to Halloween, the nip bottle discussion is going to come back with a fury in November, possibly in December. While that is all going on, as a final word, please support your local businesses. This is when things start to dry up in Salem. This is when they have to cut staff, and this is when they fight to survive based on, the rest of the year. So this is when the tourists go home. Everybody can come out.
Senator Tarr was a guest last week on his podcast here. Actually, this week, last week on Monday. This week on Monday, I'm confused. And he mentioned the economic boon that not only Salem gets, but also surrounding communities by this. I know in Gloucester, I've talked with a lot of people who I see going to restaurants or something in the afternoon, and they say, "Well, we just came from Salem." And for haunted having. So it's I didn't realize about the letdown. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
And what's interesting about that too, because you mentioned the economic boom, somebody in this room has also covered that recently from the Peabody Danvers perspective. So just to put that plug out there.
Well, that was subtle, Caroline. All right, we'll get to Caroline. Paul, final thoughts. I know that I did come across an article that you wrote about one of the victims of the mass shooting in Maine had some ties to Beverly, and I wasn't aware of that.
Yes, Stephen Vozella, who I just said was one of the shooting victims in Lewiston, was a graduate of North Shore Vocational School back in the 1990s, and he actually also attended the Beverly School for the Deaf. And we had a story back in the 90s. The sports staff actually wrote a really nice story on him. He played baseball for North Shore Tech, as a deaf athlete, and he also had this unique ability to pitch with either hand. He was ambidextrous, which was really unusual. So that was a really nice story. But yeah, it was at first I was unaware of that tie to the North Shore. And back then, the Beverly School for the Deaf, which has been around for years, I didn't know this either. They had a relationship that only lasted for 3 or 4 years with North Shore Voc, where some of their students could go to North Shore Tech, and they would have an advocate go along with them to help with signing and so forth and go through the program. And Steve Vozella was one of the only a handful of people who graduated through this program and got his degree at North Shore Tech through this, co-op program with the Beverly School for the Deaf that doesn't exist anymore. So I spoke with one of his teachers and one of his coaches from back then. So they were very helpful. And it's just, it just goes to show the widespread, impact of something like that up in Lewiston.
Absolutely. And we turn to Caroline. All kinds of accolades here. And I know one thing: if you're coming from the south, you can't get to Salem really without going through Peabody.
Very true. Yeah. The traffic's just as bad there too, leading up to Halloween. If you go kind of toward that border, or even on Route 1 near 114, I hit some traffic there, just going home, earlier this month. So definitely Salem bleeds into everywhere.
Any final thoughts and stuff that you may be covering we could tease for the newspaper?
Sure. I mean, like Dustin said, there's always development going on, around businesses and other stuff or in PBD. A big thing right now is that the North Shore Mall is very much kind of evolving and changing. Last night at the planning board in PBD, they approved a new hotel that would go where the Peabody Logan Express currently is, kind of next to the Barnes and Noble at the mall. I'm still kind of looking to see what will happen to the Express. It doesn't seem like it's going to go away, but they're going to move it. And there's been some speculation that it might move to Liberty Tree, but I haven't gotten anything solid. So that'll definitely be something coming up in the next few months. You know, at the mall, they just said goodbye to their longtime manager, Mark Whiting, and they're welcoming Scott DeCoste. So, and there's a bunch of new businesses coming there. Shack is opening a chicken sandwich place.
Yep.
It's the first one in Mass, so I'm hoping he might show up. We'll see on that. I can't make any guarantees, but that'd be a great photo op. And there's a virtual reality gaming coming there. You know, in the last year they welcomed LLB, which I know my mother was very excited about, and I'm sure many others. It seems
Yeah.
like every time I write about the mall, there's just a lot of engagement, so that's great. But you know, also small businesses and you know, the kind of piggyback off the Halloween stuff in Danvers, there's been a little mini, I'll say, tourism boom surrounding the witch trials, and so that is where a lot of that event happened. It's not, you know, obviously where the entire event happened, as some people like to say, but a lot of it's where it started really. So that used to be Salem Village, but you know, during the month of October, the Rebecca Nurse Homestead saw a couple hundred, rather I should say a couple, maybe 1,200 to 2,000 visitors alone. So it's a very popular site that you don't really think of as much in the whole grand scheme of Halloween haunted happenings. And there's a little tour that they do kind of around downtown of where, you know, victims and even accusers lived. And so it's definitely interesting to see how everything's bleeding out. And yeah, and as we go into the holiday season, I'll kind of again piggyback off of Dustin, definitely support downtown businesses in every community, regardless of where that is, because I know that they all will very much appreciate it. The mall's great, but small businesses are even better. So,
All right. We'll be following the paper on that, and we'll be talking to you more about it as well. So all three of you, I hope. Final thoughts, Paul?
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, I have a story coming up that should be running, I think, next week. It's kind of a big story on a man from Peabody named Daniel Donovan, who a year ago reported to the Beverly Hospital Emergency Department, saying he had suicidal thoughts, and he ended up being released 5 days later, disappeared. There was a search for him for weeks. He was found dead in the woods a couple miles away. His family suing Beverly Hospital. So it's kind of an involved story, but that's going to be coming out next week.
Okay, thank you. And Dustin?
Vote. That's all.
A man of few words at times.
At times.
Okay.
Not often.
All right. Let me see what I can do here. Thank you, one and all, and we will talk again soon.